Thank you for viewing today's training session. The recording will now begin.
Hello, everyone. This is Kelsey Somerville. I am a Partnership and Field Operations Specialist with the Los Angeles Regional Census Center based in our downtown LA office. I am joined today with Miriam Zuzunis as well as Michael Tolia, who are our group quarters census field managers for the San Francisco ACO as well as the Portland ACO. Michael is in Portland, Miriam is in San Francisco. We are going to be jumping into our 2020 census field operations, but to begin, I did want to clarify, I work at the LARCC, and Miriam and Michael representing as managers at our actual area census offices. These are folks on the ground who are actually seeing the entire group quarters and transitory locations operations for their ACO jurisdictions. Okay, so just a quick introduction. So you probably have already heard we have 43 area census offices throughout our 7-state region, which is overseen by the LARCC. Of course, we already mentioned we have San Francisco and Portland represented here on the training today. This is important to note because these are the jurisdictions, our entire state broken into these specific jurisdictions. And again, these are the folks doing the work on the ground. I do want to clarify, and I am very biased, but it is our field operations who, they're in it. They're in the weeds. They're doing the nitty gritty. They are ensuring our complete and accurate count of all of our communities. So they are a huge aspect of what we do here. And every other area in census, recruiting, partnership, media, admin, HR, travel, we are all geared up to try to make these guys' lives a little easier on them. So partnership, trying to get the self-response rate up, ultimately is helping our NARFU operation later on down the road because it's less enumerators being deployed to the field to knock on doors. I do want to just address and touch on, and actually Michael had the really good idea to go ahead and address field operations and COVID-19 at this time. So, of course, COVID complicates our field operations quite a bit from the enumeration methods that we are able to offer down to staffing and employment and recruiting numbers needing to be bulked up again so we can make sure to get more employees on since people we've noticed are starting to decline jobs at a higher rate than initially anticipated, of course, since COVID was never anticipated or part of the whole algorithm behind any of our numbers. So you will notice that we have a lot of gaps in the dates and time frames that we have listed throughout the PowerPoint. This is because we are still awaiting finalized timeline. We had pushed the timeline out by 2 weeks initially, which is currently the information published on websites, but we are absolutely anticipating another delay and push in our timelines. So please bear with us. We will try to address to the best of our ability with the knowledge we have any of these updates and changes to our operations. I do want to say and give a huge props to our field operations staff because they've already been incredibly flexible and adaptable thus far in operations prior to COVID. And then with this additional element and challenge to our operations, they've been even more so. So it's due to a lot of the flexibility and adaptability on the ground we're seeing with our staff that we are still going to be able to, at some point or another, get this complete and accurate count of our communities. So to break down our agenda first and foremost, we will begin with group quarters operation. This one is the most complicated of the operations. It's not the biggest one, but it is the most complicated. We will then break out service-based enumeration, but I do want to note and point out service-based enumeration is actually an operation housed within group quarters. But to be able to touch on it and really hit hard on this one, we did break it out for the purposes of this training. We will then touch on transitory locations operation, the update leave operation, the biggest field operation, which is non-response follow-up or NARFU, and some unique scenarios we will end on. So without further ado, we will go ahead and jump into our group quarter operation with Miriam.
Hi, everybody. Miriam here from the San Francisco office. Thank you for the intro, Kelsey. So we're going to give you all a kind of high-level overview of the group quarters operation. And starting with the slide, what is a group quarter or a GQ? So a group quarter is defined as a place where people who are not related live or stay in a group living arrangement. And what triggers it as a group quarters is that the entity providing housing is also providing some dimension of a service. So this could be cleaning or social services, healthcare services. This is a non-typical unique living arrangement. Some examples, that's why it's not considered for individual the way that other housing is enumerated. Some examples would be a college residence hall, a group home like group workers facility, group quarters, prisons, nursing homes, residential treatment centers. GQs also include the service-based enumeration, the SBEs, like Kelsey mentioned, and the targeted non-sheltered outdoor locations, or TNSLs, which are essentially where our homeless neighbors are located. If they're not in the service-based facilities like the soup kitchens, then we are going to locate them at a targeted non-sheltered outdoor location. Okay, and next slide is going to be the types of group quarters. All right. And types of
I
group
just
quarters.
got kicked out of the recording.
Uh-oh.
Let me see. I lost my connection. I got a notice that.
Hi, everyone. Miriam here. Thanks for your patience. So we're on the types of group quarters GQs slide. This slide includes a list of different GQ types. In the bottom right-hand corner displays the types of service-based GQs, which include targeted non-sheltered outdoor locations, or TNSLs. TNSLs are included under the service-based group quarters because they are enumerated by the Census Bureau during the same time period. TNSLs are areas where folks experiencing homelessness are known to stay or live outside in areas such as parks, bus stops, tent encampments. Okay, and if we could go to the next slide. Great. So how are group quarters enumerated? Group quarters are enumerated in multiple phases. So the first phase is advanced contact. So GQ advanced contact, we've referred to it as GQAC, GQAC. The advanced contact phase allows us to update the list of GQ contact information, which is imported from the previous census, and we gather critical information about each location, the point person, by calling them in office, and each local area office is contacting the GQs within their workload and within their geographic jurisdiction to verify not only their location and type, but also the contact information and determine which method of enumeration the facility will choose. The next phase of GQ occurs over a 3-day period in late March, which we all know has been postponed. This phase is called SBE for service-based enumeration. The goal of SBE is to count people who do not have a usual residence and often get assistance and meals from these service-based locations. So during the SBE operation, we count where they receive services such as shelters, soup kitchens, mobile food vans, and other service locations. We will also count persons as predetermined outdoor locations, such as parks, overpasses, and areas where people are staying outside. Again, those are called the TNCLs, the transitory non-sheltered outdoor locations. So area census offices will schedule teams of enumerators to visit pre-identified locations over this 3-day period to enumerate every single individual receiving services or residing in the area at the time. Enumerators will not be operating on their own during this time. They will be paired up and in a coordinated effort to cover all the SBEs during this time. The final phase of enumerating group quarters is the group quarters enumeration, also called GQE. GQE has the largest workload and the longest duration of all 3 phases. During this phase, enumerators will work with the GQ contact person identified in the advanced contact stage to complete enumeration either electronically by having the contact complete the e-response on the internet or by several other paper enumeration methods. E-response is the electronic way that GQs can upload their enumeration records without any further visits from enumerators. Okay. And now the next phase is, or the next slide, we show you a little bit more of that GQAC breakdown and order of operations, the information we're collecting. And here we go with also phase 2, service-based enumeration. Again, these are considered service-based facilities are considered shelters, soup kitchens, food vans, and outdoor locations where our homeless neighbors are residing. Okay. And if we can move to the next slide.
Do you see GQE up on your screen?
Phase 3. Oh, there we go. Great. Okay. So phase 3. So we have some changes to enumeration method at this point. E-response for GQ uses a completely separate URL than a regular household survey, so they must receive an invitation with a unique passcode in order to respond for a GQ using e-response. So this will be sent to the facility prior as we arranged this method with them. Another method that is still standing is paper response data collection. Like e-response, but you don't need to print the spreadsheet, but you need to print the spreadsheet instead of uploading it. You can be listing, it can be any listing or spreadsheet that the GQ already has on file. We usually ask them, for their administrative records for this, as long as it matches as close to possible as the data fields required. So for the paper response methods that are still going to be used, drop-off pickup is when we leave the ICQs with the GQ for the GQ to distribute and pick up. So that entails an enumerator setting an appointment to drop off these individual census questionnaires and then a date to pick them back up. An in-person interview, right now we're only offering it for unique scenarios due to the public health orders in place. Facility self-enumeration is what allows, allows autonomy of the GQ to operate independently and ensure a complete count of their GQ. In this case, the enumerator will swear in a representative of the GQ to conduct this enumeration. Okay. Great. So, statement on handling duplication. In this case, the college dorms is a good example. As a student can self-respond. For example, their parents may count them at home, and they also may be counted in their school's response as we receive administrative records from college housing facilities. This three-way count will be processed through the PSA to deduplicate the records, which essentially is an algorithm in which will account for possible duplications in enumeration like this example. Okay, now we're on GQ facts.
Okay, so we'll
Number
go ahead.
one.
Michael and I are going to take turns asking Miriam these questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first. This is Michael from Portland. If colleges and universities send their students home and are only operating online right now, should the students be included in their parents' questionnaire?
So the answer that we would tell people is no, because we are still accounting for students through the GQ.
Okay, thank you. And some healthcare facilities, Kelsey, I'm sorry, do you want to take that?
No, you got it. I can ask.
Oh, sorry. All right. Some healthcare facilities are some healthcare facilities and higher education institutions can submit demographic information on behalf of their parents and students, or patients and students. What about HIPAA and FERPA?
Right. So this came up within different phases of our GQ operations, where healthcare facilities in particular were reluctant to give information. Our response is that this is covered in Title 13, which protects all the data that the Census Bureau uses. So participating in the GQ operation by submitting a directory of information is covered in the confidentiality clauses in Title 13, which governs the census data protections.
And that is, and to add on to that too, that is baked into FERPA as well, as Miriam was saying, through Title 13. And that has also been confirmed with the Department of Education, kind of backing up decennial census operations with colleges and universities, who their general counsel has suggested that participation with decennial census would be a direct, would directly go against FERPA legislation. So we do have legislation in place to help protect decennial census operations through essentially Title 13. So Miriam, to also ask you the next question, what is the difference, you mentioned the ICQ, what is the difference between the individual census questionnaire and the household survey?
So the individual census questionnaire, those are used specifically for GQs. They don't capture info about ownership of the property like a traditional census questionnaire distributed to households or online would ask. ICQs also can't be freely distributed at events or given to community members to hand out. Each ICQ has 2 barcodes, so they are very specifically tracked and assigned to the facility in which they're distributed to. An individual, so there's 2 barcodes. One correlates with the individual that is filling out the ICQ, and the other one has a direct correlation to the GQ facility itself. So anyone who handles ICQs must also be sworn in using a special oath. The oath for other federal positions do not count. This is the oath for administering the census and the individual census questionnaires.
Yeah, so it actually is a lot different than the household survey, quite a bit. And then to ask you the final question on here, and then I'll open up the chat for some subsidized questions as well. What if I'm talking to someone who wants to self-respond, and then I find out that they live in a GQ?
Again, this is similar to the example we gave with the on-campus housing or the college housing. You can explain to the person in this case that they have already been accounted for by their GQ, by their group quarters. However, if they insist on self-responding, as we covered, there is a deed duplication process that will capture this after the fact.
Okay, awesome. I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and proceed to service-based enumeration, the most exciting operation in field operations, in my opinion, but that's also my opinion.
Great. So I'll continue on this for a few more minutes. Service-based enumeration, like we mentioned, is housed under the group quarters operation, but is focusing on the service-based facilities in order for us to capture our most vulnerable communities who don't have a traditional place to stay, but may be found are congregating at soup kitchens or shelters. So service-based enumeration types. Also, there's different venues in which are included under SBE. So now we're looking at here's the different types. We went over those briefly. I'm now going to go, I have the residence information slide up. Great. And so residence information, people who on Census Day are in these transitional shelters or emergency facilities and are experiencing homelessness, staff members are counted at these residents where if they also are sleeping at this facility. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, then they will also be accounted for in this count. People who on Census Day are at soup kitchens or regularly scheduled food vans that provide food to people experiencing homelessness, they will also be counted at this facility as the primary count, as they do not have usual homes elsewhere. So this is why we count the service-based facilities. And to continue on that, people who on Census Day are at targeted non-sheltered outdoor locations or experiencing homelessness, and the trigger for this is they're not staying at a campground and paying. They're not staying at a motel and paying. This is somewhere where they are staying and not paying, and this is considered an outdoor location that is counted under SBE. People who are temporarily displaced or experiencing homelessness for a short or indefinite period of time are also counted at the residence where they live or sleep most of the time. If they cannot determine a place where they live most of the time, they are counted where they are staying on Census Day. So again,
I am thinking of, I just had a thought too on that. Miriam, you addressing tinsels and how we count tinsels. We do actually track both illegal and legal tinsels, if you will. So if there's a campground where people are supposed to pay to stay there, but then there's an encampment with a lot of folks who are not paying to stay there, we do track them actually as a tinsel, even though they're technically dwelling there illegally.
That's a good clarification. Okay, enumeration methods for service-based locations. Originally, the only enumeration methods for SBEs were the in-person interview and the paper response data collection, in which we would receive administrative records from shelters, for example. However, due to the COVID-19 crisis, SBEs can now respond using the following methods: paper response data collection, e-response, and drop-off pickup. And again, e-response in particular, all of these methods are predetermined so that the facility knows what type of method they expect to be enumerated by, and e-response in particular, they will receive credentials and login information prior in order to fill that out. Okay, awesome. How to prepare. Service-based enumeration, the operation schedule, obviously things have changed, but GQAC, as we mentioned, was the in-office advanced contact phase, in which we completed in February and the beginning of March. The second phase, or the first in-field phase, is a count of the SBEs, including shelters, soup kitchens, mobile food vans, and outdoor locations. Again, those appointments are preset, and it's up to us as the field management staff to know exactly what our caseload is for each day, how many appointments, and accordingly send enumerators and census field supervisors to facilities within that short time span to cover everyone. And we do this in a short time span in order to capture everyone in one place and reduce the duplicates that may occur from a longer span of enumeration. Okay, and we can move to...
Which is not easy. Trying to set all of those appointments in a 3-day period with thousands of enumerators, huge props to our GQ CFMs like Miriam and Michael, because that is the equivalent of a 20,000 piece puzzle. It is not an easy job that they're undertaking, but we're doing it, right, guys? We're going to do this.
And also, right in the middle of that 3-day period, you're doing a tinsel night count, which is a whole nother separate thing. So yes, there's a lot of pieces there to manage and to make sure the sector.
Right, yeah. Right, and even more now, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this as once we resume field operations, but our city's most vulnerable communities are even more vulnerable at this time, and they're being placed in temporary shelters, quarantine facilities, hotels. So we're going to have to account for more locations than previously accounted for in this operation during this time in order to count everyone.
Can I just add to that? There's one particular shelter that I got a call from in Portland, and he was saying that the director was saying that because of social distancing, however many people he once had are now scattered into other facilities or temporary sites. So to go to that point, how many people they might have had before COVID, now his people are scattered out. It's not going to be as easy to capture all that. So, yeah, that's all.
Yeah. So we had initially captured all the population counts for every single one of these service-based organizations. Now we will go back and revisit every new pop-up shelter, new RVs, hotels, motels that are now housing our unhoused populations to get them off the street. Our staff, once we resume operations, our staff will be, hitting the ground running to capture every single one of those new locations to update our workload. So it is, again, huge credit to their flexibility and adaptability through all of this, because it will be a huge lift to ensure that we're tracking everyone with all of these changes to our service-based organizations especially.
Yes, definitely. There's a lot to prepare for this once we go back into the field. Okay, so if you note, as we mentioned, the census does not provide official homelessness statistics, although this talking point is complicated because we do, as Kelsey mentioned, ID the locations and where unhoused neighbors are located, and it is also geocoded to that location. However, as in GQs, where we have a set number of residents in which we know we're going to distribute ICQs to, that same logic is not exactly applied to the tinsel canvassing. We have also added food banks to the list of the SBEs. They'll be handled similar to soup kitchens. And like Michael mentioned, the tinsel canvassing does take place, and it's an operation also in its own right under a GQ because it takes place similar to what cities do as a point-in-time count, in the sense that it happens through the course of one day or one night, again, to reduce potential duplicate counts of people. So the tinsel operation was set to be March 31st, the evening of March 31st, starting at 9 p.m. Prep, and then midnight hit the field and go through the course of the night until the morning of April 1st. So that was the date for the tinsel canvassing. Again, we do plan to do that once we resume field operations, but the tinsel count in itself is its own kind of field operation.
Nice. Okay, so we're on the service-based now FAQs, and we'll go ahead and I'll just ask both of you these questions. We weren't sure how long we'd have Miriam because our GQ CFMs are very busy, so they have many calls throughout the day with all of their staff. So while we still have Miriam, let's go ahead and get through these FAQs for SBE. So Michael and Miriam, both of you as the experts and the subject matter experts here, can people experiencing homelessness self-respond to the census even though they do not have an address?
Yeah. The same thing for registering to vote. Actually, in a lot of cities, you can put cross streets. So through non-ID processing, everyone across the nation can self-respond anywhere regardless of their living situation. So that is an option for individuals experiencing homelessness.
Michael, did you want to add to one? Do you have thoughts on that too?
No, I think she answered that sufficiently. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we'll all take on number two because this is a huge question that a ton of census employees get, and it's important to be able to answer this question and to know how to answer this question properly. So how will you count people during tinsel without cultural facilitators this time around? Cultural facilitators is something that we had in 2010. So this was like the social workers, law enforcement, who we were able to get on board for the 2010 census to kind of act as gatekeepers in our communities as we went and conducted tinsel, our unhoused population count. And yes, we do not have this option this time around. We do not have the cultural facilitators at our disposal, largely due to, one, the PII factor. As we're engaging with in-person interviews on the street, we can't even have other individuals in earshot around these in-person interviews in order to protect the privacy of the individuals that we're interviewing. Our PII, Title 13, all of our protections apply to everybody, not just our regular household survey, everyone in any unique living situation. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason is simply budgeting, money, financing. This wasn't baked into the plan this time around. We are, however, able to deploy a ton of enumerators. So in essence, we will have strength in numbers on our side. And we will also have other types of mechanisms at our disposal as well. So when we're in the field conducting these interviews with folks and we need clarification on something or language assistance or people already there at the tinsel locations or really well-organized tinsels like we see in both LA and Seattle, there are potential tinsel contacts who we will engage with to help us navigate the streets, navigate our interviews. So there are some things we are still able to do to help us get our foot in the door.
Great. Thanks, Kelsey.
Do you guys have anything to add to that, Susan?
I was just going to say, like, we're going to be running like kind of a command center, so it's like a location out in the field where everyone's going to get together, and we're going to prep them and give them their assignments, and then we'll be there throughout the night. Also, the CFMs will be there throughout the night to assist in anything that arises and to help out the best we can. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's, with that, all of that planning involved with tinsel, we also have the emergency plans and the emergency numbers, and there's a lot of elements involved to this. Okay, I'll ask the next question here. How are people counted during tinsel if you cannot see them and or they're unwilling to cooperate? Do you interview people during tinsel?
So the goal we do go into the operation with the intention of interviewing, and we do have language identification cards if that is an issue that comes up and we need to locate an enumerator or a field supervisor that has language skills. If someone is incapacitated, sleeping, so on, we do not disturb them in order to get the answers, but we count through observation. And Michael, feel free to add.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of illustrate that we're not to like interrupt anyone or wake anyone up or, you know, get into any kind of like, you know, private conversation. It's more just counting through observation and working with the people that we see that are awake that are willing to help us.
Perfect. I'd echo exactly all the same things that you guys already said. Okay,
one more thing I would add for Tinsel Night is for our ACO, we are coming up with a different scenarios, kind of what to expect, do's and don'ts, kind of one-pager for enumerators that will go out in Tinsel, because we do want to include some of that cultural sensitivity and clear delineations of what you should and should not do. And you can treat a tinsel site as if it's a GQ or household in the sense that if there is an individual who is available to answer questions about the rest of their tinsel, that we can interview that person as a way to also account for other individuals staying there.
By the way, you want to grab those bowls?
That's all
And
I
we
had to add.
do. That is, Miriam, that actually brings up a really good point that I want to touch on here too. There is kind of a blanket cultural training, cultural sensitivity training and safety training for our SBE enumerators. But for unique locations like Portland and San Francisco that has a different landscape when it comes to their unhoused populations, they will subsidize their training a little bit with their own local knowledge and expertise. So Michael and Miriam doing this for a little bit of time already kind of know and have in mind how they want to subsidize the trainings to make it more specific to their locations and regions and the needs in Portland and San Francisco in particular that might be different, or set them apart a little bit from the rest of the nation when it comes to how best to count and interact with their unhoused populations.
Yeah, I do anticipate people being a little, I do anticipate people being a little bit more concerned about us approaching them as a result of the COVID situation. So we're going to be talking about how to mitigate, any of that stuff too.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers here when considering all of these things. And to that point, I did kind of already touch on 4, but if you guys want to add to what the training of our tinsel enumerators looks like.
Yeah, so definitely do's and don'ts, some cultural sensitivity training that's relevant to the ACO. We will be definitely going over the different kind of geographic locations in which they'll be deployed to. We have parks. We have a lot of urban context where people are staying on streets. So that training, a lot of our census field supervisors have experience doing tinsel outreach from the advanced contact phase, and so it is a paper-based operation, so they will be trained. The supervisors will also, train their enumerators on how to fill out the materials to account for the individuals they will be observing. There's probably more. Michael can probably explain more. That's just what I thought of right off the bat.
I also have to say that in our ACO, we're fortunate enough to have our lead CFM who participated in tinsel in 2010, and so I think she's a great resource for us in terms of helping train enumerators. And also, early on, we did a tinsel canvassing operation where we went around and found all the various tinsels and recorded those locations. And I think that a lot of time has passed since then, and as a result of COVID again, I think our locations are going to be slightly different now, and so it's going to be interesting to kind of reassess that, and that's going to have to be part of the training that we do is incorporating all that new stuff into it. That's all I got. Sorry.
No, that's good. I do also want to say, too, the tinsel training is a part of the group quarters enumerator training, which is a full 4-day, 8-hour-day training on how to conduct these interviews, all of the different enumeration methods, but we do spend some time within those 4 days talking specifically on tinsel. And I have Miriam and I talked about this when we were together in San Francisco. The cultural sensitivity video is actually really, really good and very informative and helpful, and obviously a ton of experts in the field when it comes to how best to interact with folks despite some of the challenges they may have, whether, substance abuse or whatever it might be that might make a interview and interactions with individuals somewhat complicated. And we got a really good question in the chat that I want to pause here to address before we move on to our next question. And that is, how will you leverage community partners to help with SBE? That's a really good question as of right now, because we are in the midst of negotiations and conversations with, in particular right now, the State of California Complete Count Committee. And if some of these conversations go well, we hope to duplicate it throughout our 7-state region, but it will look like a lot of really engaging counties, cities, and our complete count committees, whether through the state or local, to help us identify all the changes that we're seeing in SBEs. They also do assist with other group quarters as well, like our higher education institutions, but they will be a huge asset for us when it comes to coordinating all of these new pop-up SBEs, if you will, to make sure we have everyone completely accounted for in our workload. So it's through shared partnerships with local community stakeholders, our ACOs on the ground figuring this out, coordinating with a lot of our CCCs, and also finding who the gatekeepers are and giving us those connections to the gatekeepers. I can give a example. One of our Bay Area offices, the GQ TFM, connected with her local complete count committee and found that for one of the specific counties that she's in charge of overseeing the count for, found the hotels and motels gatekeeper, if you will, to all of the new, any of the hotels and motels within that county who will be opening rooms specifically to our folks in our unhoused communities, to make sure she's able to get in the door and get the count of these folks. And this gatekeeper has already agreed to working with her to make sure those folks get enumerated. So a lot of this does come into, a lot of our community stakeholders at this time really will come into play with helping us ensure we have a complete workload. And it's funny because it's actually, I know Miriam actually works a ton in her communities, and she, in a way, even though she's internal to Census, in a way, she kind of acts the part as a community stakeholder too. Our folks in Michael and Portland, our folks are from these areas and very concerned and engaged with their communities. They want to make sure they're getting a complete count for their communities. They are very much civil servants, if you will, and do want to make sure that they are getting this information accordingly.
We can I put something towards that point? To that point, we have a community just east of Portland that contacted us a while back saying that in 2010, not a single houseless person was counted. And so we've connected with them to coordinate and make sure that, this time around that, we do get a count there because, it is very important to get these good counts for funding and for other reasons. And so, it's really great to connect with those communities that, especially when they want to be engaged in the process.
Yeah, definitely community organizations and member organizations that are serving and part of the communities that we're enumerating is really important. We have a coalition on homelessness here in San Francisco. We have a publication called The Street Sheet, in which is operated by homeless individuals. And so, yeah, community buy-in is really big. And, I think that's all I have to contribute at this point. But, yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking. Okay, the next question on here, will tinsel enumerators be armed?
No.
Definitely not.
They are not supposed to be. We can't necessarily like check the stocks of every enumerator to ensure they don't have a knife or something. But no, they're told up front they're not supposed to be armed, no weapons, nothing. So and we get that question quite a bit actually. But yeah, that's part of our training. It's part of what we communicate to enumerators. Will tinsel enumerators wear masks?
The ACOs can make them available if the enumerators want them.
Awesome. Okay, and the final question here, does the census use point-in-time count data to subsidize their count? This one is a little complicated because the answer is yes and no. So we as a census have to conduct our own count. So when it comes to actually pulling their data and using it as our counts, we do not subsidize in that way. We look to point-in-time information when it comes to visiting the correct locations, informing our operations. We try to recruit heavily from point-in-time folks, the people who volunteer to do the point-in-time count. So we have a lot of similar operations to point-in-time, and they are the experts since they do this year over year over year. So we work with them, we coordinate with them, we contact the point-in-time folks, we recruit from their volunteer base, and we use their location data, but we cannot just take their counts and use it as our count and not conduct tinsel at all. We still must conduct the tinsel operation.
I know in our ACO in Portland, we looked at point-in-time counts that the counties provided, like Multnomah and Clackamas County provided, to kind of give us an idea of where we should select enumerators from, and so that we could ensure that we had enough people in particular areas to count, like if it was a really high density area of people that were houseless, that we'd have enough enumerators there, for example.
Awesome. We did get another question here. This is a good clarifying question because there is some not necessarily misinformation, but because operations change so often, we're often needing to just pause and take a step back and kind of visit where we are at any given moment. So initially there was not going to be masks, but now yes, the federal government is paying to reimburse for masks at the ACO level for a tinsel count in particular. So this is not to say that this is, wide scale for every single operation, every single enumeration. This is particular to tinsel. I believe it's, do you guys remember, up to $5 or something per mask? And I can't remember where we processed this, but this was baked into tinsel to be able to provide for ACOs to be able to ensure their tinsel enumerators who are wanting a mask can have one. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on, and Michael is going to train us on transitory locations.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Miriam.
Thanks, Miriam. So what is a transitory location? Transitory locations are locations where people live in a non-traditional housing that is transient or movable in nature, and they're relatively small but very critical operation to count residents who do not have a usual home elsewhere. And so we have RV parks and campgrounds, hotels and motels, marinas, and racetracks and circuses. And the ACOs aren't responsible for the circuses. That's handled from the National Center.
Unfortunately, how fun would that one have been?
I know, right?
To do though, right? Headquarters gets the fun things.
Yeah. So during phase one, which was in the end of February through mid-March, we did a transitory location advanced contact, which was similar to how we did group quarters advanced contact. We had our clerks and USAs calling on these transitory locations. That was our in-office operation. That was to set up appointments and to correct any information such as contact person and addresses, and to also find out a little bit about each location. And then the ones that we weren't able to make contact with, just as in group quarters, we would send out our census field supervisors to make contact at these places to schedule the appointments. Phase two, which is actually the enumeration of the transitory location, they'll be in-person and paper-based, and as a result of COVID, we're still waiting to figure out what those dates are going to be. Phase one, transitory locations, as I said before, is area census office calls the TLs to confirm the contact data and explain the procedures. The ACO staff verify the name, location, and point of contact, collect the type and number of units, and select an enumeration appointment. If there's no available contact name or phone number, a census worker will make an in-person visit to collect this information. Enumeration of the transitory location. Enumerators count the people living or staying in a transitory location at a transitory, or in a transitory unit located at a transitory location, who will not be returning to a usual home elsewhere by May 5th. Is that still the case with that date? I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, you're right, Michael. Yeah, good catch on that. That will no longer be the case, most likely. We're going to have to extend that. But as of right now, that's still what is in play since all of our dates are under review.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there is one enumeration option offered to TLs. This is currently being revised to include more enumeration methods, the in-person interview. So I guess this whole operation is still under review. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really interesting to consider these entire operations that were completely dependent on this one enumeration method, and now we are no longer doing this enumeration method. So it really does change our operations quite a bit to adjust to COVID needs. Just to kind of pull out the transitory units versus transitory location thing, since I know we get so many abbreviations and terminology. A transitory unit, think of as a slip in a marina, and think of the transitory location as the overall marina. So when we're tracking our different transitory locations, we will track the marina and the point of contact info for that specific marina, understanding that each marina has a bunch of slips with the actual boats where people are living and dwelling. And then we track how many units there are as well at the marina or at the transitory location.
Correct. Same for RV parks and other types of TLs. Practical application. Let's look at a church for an example. So cars that have permission to park in the parking lot in lieu of payment. So if the church allows them to stay in the parking lot, that would be a TL. People who have permission to sleep in the church at night, that would be considered a shelter. An encampment right off the church property. If it's not sanctioned by the church necessarily, then it would be considered a tinsel. Individuals who sleep in their cars at night, attending a weekly meal provided by the church, they would be counted under the soup kitchen method. And individuals who sleep in their cars who do not have permission to park in the parking lot overnight, that would be considered a tinsel. Same with people that park RVs out on the street. those type of locations. So this can be complicated, and it's helpful to remember that our goal is to count people in the right place. The exact residence policies and criteria do not matter as much as ensuring we count people in the field. I'm sorry, that's all. Yeah.
Okay, so some of the things to remember about group quarters and transitory locations is that these respondents don't get mail. They may in the form of like a college dorm PO box, but it's ultimately overseen by the group quarter. So we go through the group quarter in order to count folks. These respondents should not self-respond. They are able to self-respond just as everybody is through non-ID processing, but they should not, since they will be a duplicate count that way. If they do, we do have the deduplication measures in place that Miriam went over earlier. And as I mentioned a little earlier, but it's definitely worth repeating, these respondents have the same confidentiality and privacy rights as everybody else. Every person in a GQ, TL, SBE, tinsel, whatever it might be, they have the same confidentiality and privacy rights. There are separate operations for sensitive group quarters like domestic violence coalitions, human trafficking coalitions, shelters, either for youth, for women and families, whatever it might be. There's a completely separate operation. We have specific DVS designees at every ACO. The names of our designees are confidential. They receive their DVS workload and they are counted at the ACO level. Our designees, this is the only time our designees at the ACO work specifically with headquarters in order to conduct these operations. Even at the LARCC level, we only have 2 DVS points of contact. So it's handled it's all paper-based, no online anything, in order to continue to apply as many measures as possible on our end to keep these specific operations as confidential as possible. So a lot of people ask us how we come about our group quarters and transitory location enumeration universe. How do we know we have every college and university listed? How do we know we have every group court or group home listed, every residential treatment facility? How could we possibly know we have everyone? Well, this information comes from not only LUCA. There's a similar, I'm forgetting now the abbreviation for, there's a similar operation to LUCA, but specifically for service-based organizations. So we hear back from our communities and we apply that information into our workload. We also use American Community Survey, all of the other census surveys to inform the 2020 census GQ and TL universe. And we are constantly working to keep this updated as much as possible. We also have engaged complete count committees if they hear from group quarters who say, hey, I never got a call during advanced contact. We send those needs directly to our ACOs, and our ACOs get in touch with them immediately to ensure that they're in our workload. So to touch on that a little more, to dig deeper into what that looks like, Census works with the stakeholders in our communities who are able to exert some effort and resources into ensuring everyone's in our workload, which the state of California in particular in our 7-state region has put a ton of money into. And then our points of contact at our different and various group quarters. We also work with them to help us bridge the gap with other organizations or other needs in our communities. You'll notice on this slide, the arrow only goes in one direction when it comes to census. We're getting a note. Can everyone hear me just fine? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I'll have, let me
Yes,
pause
Kelsey, we can hear you.
Okay. So the arrow only goes one way when it comes to coordinating with external stakeholders and points of contact in our communities and the census. The reason being is we are so very strict with our data sharing, data stewardship measures that people are not able to, internally in census, are not able to share any of our data externally. We collect a ton of data from external stakeholders, and all of this must remain private and confidential. So now, to go ahead and go into our next operation here, which is update leave. The big picture, I wanted to take the time at this point to make note of, yes, we have a lot of operations all running at the same time. They run parallel to each other. Group quarters is not followed up in NARFU for any of our GQs that we are not able to enumerate in GQ. We have specific follow-up procedures in place with GQ. UL, similar. UE, we're not touching on update and enumerate here because update and enumerate is very specific and very small, but it is similar to UL, update leave. But yes, there are a lot of operations going on all at the same time, and there is definitely needs and reasons behind why we have all these different operations. There's just so many different living situations, really, is what we can underline in that message there. So what is update leave? It is kind of really as simple as the census, we update the address list and maps, and we leave the 2020 census questionnaire package. But let's go into how this works and also why this is needed and important. So this is conducted in areas where the physical address and mailing address do not identify the actual exact physical location of the unit. So an example of this in really rural communities is all we might have on file is something like rural route 231, box 4. That doesn't connect us to an actual physical location. We work from the physical locations of the living quarters. This is the information that we need in order to be able to distribute questionnaires and collect information on where people are actually residing. So this is needed in more rural areas and communities. This is primary method used for tribal lands where there's just no city-style address, or even where natural disasters have occurred. This is also how we can still capture those folks. The exact location is very critical when it comes to determining congressional districts, voting districts, and other geographic areas. So why is this important? This operation is how we provide 2020 census questionnaire packages to these residents. So like we already mentioned, who do not have a city-style address, who do not receive mail through a city-style address or receive mail at P.O. boxes. So yes, just to pause really fast, that's a huge point. People who receive mail at P.O. boxes do not receive the regular household survey. They are captured in update leave. All of our folks receiving mail through P.O. boxes are captured through the update leave operation. This is also how we capture those affected by major natural disasters and to have high concentrations of seasonally vacant housing. This also allows us to update and ensure we have accurate address lists and maps. This lays the groundwork for cost-effective and accurate decennial census. And this is initially supposed to be one of our earlier operations that we'd be in the midst of as of right now. However, this has been paused, but we will continue to proceed with our update leave operation once given the go-ahead. But it does, because it's one of our earlier operations, it does pave the way for the rest of our 2020 census operations. So I know getting into quality control may seem a little nitty-gritty, but it's actually a huge element of our update leave operation. So I did want to spend a little bit of time on quality control and just give it a little bit of attention here. Quality control measures, this is what we rely on to really ensure the accuracy of the information that we're collecting and ensure we are producing nothing but quality work. There are completely separate staff who conduct our QC activities. So when we look at our quality control enumerators and census field supervisors, they're completely different people and teams from our regular update leave production field staff, so our enumerator and CFSs. Completely separate groups of people. We need autonomy between the groups for pretty obvious reasons, right? We'll have the primary people working in quality control, or the primary people were doing production, and then the rest of the folks coming in completely separate from the initial groups, not engaged between themselves, quality control going in and running course, going through their specific production workload, which will actually only entails approximately 10% of the production workload. They're only quality controlling or QCing 10% of that initial workload. The QC enumerators will canvass specified addresses in previously worked areas. They'll only give a 2020 census questionnaire package to the newly added housing units, existing addresses converted to housing units, and housing units that did not receive a questionnaire during production. Okay, so with that being said, we will go ahead and move into our largest field operation, which is non-response follow-up.
Can I just say about the survey team is that, just to validate, we've never met them. We don't know anything about them, and I don't even know if they have another office somewhere else that they go to. So they've done a really good job of keeping them separate.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll take non-response follow-up. NARFU is the biggest operation. It's meant to capture the individuals that didn't respond to the e-response or any other methods. The estimate is that about 40% of the nation will not self-respond, and these housing units will be captured during 16 weeks of NARFU, and it's the largest decennial operation. While an enumerator is in the community, they will use their smartphones to complete the census questionnaire through in-person interviews with respondents, and they must visit each address on their case list and attempt to complete interview. And I know they're working on ways of making that more friendly to social distancing. NARFU data collection. When enumerators are unable to complete an interview, they leave a notice of visit, or NOV, at the housing unit that informs the household that someone has been there and will return at a later date. The NOV also provides the household with the information they need to self-respond. And then as CFMs, we have to track and ensure that these things are being followed up on, and that we have the correct amount of staff each day in the field to make sure that all this gets completed. Quality control for NARFU. Quality control is an essential component of all census operations to ensure the accuracy of the data we collect. One of the most important parts of quality control is conducting re-interviews of completed enumerator interviews, which ensures the highest quality data is collected. And that's really important in terms of just keeping everyone honest, keeping the enumerators honest, making sure that they're doing what they say they're doing out there every day, and that we get the best count. NARFU quality control, how it works. If a case is selected for re-interview, or RI, it is assigned to an enumerator. It will be assigned to someone other than the person who completed the original interview. Enumerators visit specified addresses in the previously worked areas to verify if data was collected and to recollect information about the residents in the HU. The original case is compared to the re-interview data through computer and clerical matching. And this quality control measure is important because errors made in NARFU can lead to missing people who should be counted or overcounting existing populations.
Okay, but to go back to, no, oh wait, Michael, you did finish that slide, right? Or did I cut you short?
No, I finished it.
Okay, so to go back to, we received a question during ULQC, but wanted to also finish up NARFU QC prior to tackling this one. So the question is, if ULQC, so I'd also apply now NARFU QC, is under PES. So these are actually completely separate groups. Our groups have different QCing groups in play that are not connected to PES. So PES just runs a course of separate surveys in addition to what we do. So think of QC as part of the NARFU operation in essence, even though it is different folks tackling it. And think of PES as a completely separate entity almost running alongside, doing somewhat similar things to QC. However, PES is mostly monitoring, observing, and running reports and tests and different data collection. But our QC, I'm sorry, is there a question I'm missing? Or is that just background? That may have just been a background. Okay. So the QC, like the NARFU QC operation, for instance, it is part of the NARFU operation, and it also is there to capture anyone or anything that might be falling through the cracks. So the QC operation for NARFU and for UL, they actually are there to capture any folks we may have missed or new entities that we need to make sure we get, making sure we are conducting quality control as we're going through and doing operations so we can act on anything immediately if we're noticing any kinks or issues at all. PES kind of doing their own thing, not exactly an actionable entity, if you will, like our QCing operations is baked in to allow us to have. I'm seeing I'm having problems with the network, so hopefully this is still working and we'll be able to continue to progress through this training and it doesn't crash on us again.
Mine says connecting again too.
Okay, I paused the recording really quickly. So you guys, oh, mine does too. Now I just got it connecting.
Okay.
All right.
Hiccup number
it gave me, last time it gave, also it looks like we are actually progressing at way too good of timing, and we're going to be coming up, because we're on the last section and it's only 4 slides, so we're actually going to be coming up pretty short of 2 hours. Are you guys able to maybe ask additional questions then in order to fill more time if need be, or are we good finishing maybe at like an hour and a half of training?
If we finish in an hour and a half, will be good. But we can pepper more questions in there as well.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, then maybe feel out for us too. If we'll probably be at an hour and a half. I think we did start a little early too with the recording. So maybe
you're at 1 hour 17 minutes.
Oh, okay. Then we started right on time because it's 11:18. Then I think we'll likely make the just short of an hour and a half. But if you do have additional questions you can think of, you don't have to like address questions just to try to add more content or time. We cover everything, then we cover everything. So if you do have questions, then definitely help us. Okay, so now to address our last and final section of the training is some of our unique scenarios that we see between military as well as tribal territory. So the census does collect data from the military. This operation has changed quite a bit because we initially were going to try to work with military in early 2019 to just do a complete data transfer from the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security straight into Census 2020 records. However, we have now had to make it an in-field operation, and our ACOs have been very flexible with engaging this completely new operation, if you will, as of last fall, to kind of wrap their minds around this whole new operation and get ready and prepared for this month. So military installations are unique because you see a mix of the many different operations in one military installation. So we will touch on that next, but let's pause here to look at specifically who the census is collecting data from when it comes to military personnel. So as I mentioned, Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security, because Department of Homeland Security oversees Coast Guard. So between DOD and CG personnel, we also collect information on their dependents. We collect information on the civilians living on these military installations and personnel assigned to military vessels with a U.S. home port. So military ships are a little different than our military vessels with a U.S. home port because military ships are actually completely overseen through headquarters. There's a specific operation for that. But for these four categories, we, our ACOs, are doing the work to collect this information. One big thing to point out, and a question we get a lot on, is for what about people stationed stateside but deployed elsewhere, or whatever the case might be. So for people who are stationed here in the U.S., but they happen to be deployed on Census Day somewhere else around the world, wherever they might be, they are counted at their stateside address. So it's based on where our military personnel are stationed. If they're stationed overseas and their dependents are living with them overseas, we are not collecting information on them for our stateside count. The Defense Manpower Data Center actually provides these records to us. And there is a separate count, if you will, than our actual stateside decennial census count. But of course, for our folks who might be deployed during Census Day, but again are here are usually stationed here in the U.S., they are counted in our stateside count. So these little regular community kind of an interesting take on what our regular community might look like within the scope of a military installation, kind of like a little community in comparison to the bigger picture communities. So within one installation, we could have regular family housing units where they receive individual invitations to respond, in which case we'd be following up with them through the NARFU operation. At the same time, a lot of installations have motels, hotels, campgrounds, RV parks, and marinas, in which case we'd be counting all of those types of entities within a military installation through our transitory locations operation. And at the same time as all of that's going on, there are military GQs at installations like barracks, disciplinary barracks and jails, military treatment facilities and hospitals, in which case those are counted through the group quarters operation. So there's a lot of training at play at our ACO level and our military ACO POCs who know in order to avoid being as annoying as we potentially could be at any given military installation, since they're not a big fan of visitors, they are very accustomed to, and it's been drilled into our military POCs, and they're very aware of trying to overlap as many of these operations as possible. So we're not spending every day for weeks at the same installation trying to get our staff on the ground of these installations. So they are looking at and doing the best they can to make all of these operations as efficient and effective as possible, given certain time frames and constraints there. So how this looks, because it is another government entity working with us, We do have our military branch liaisons, so our higher-up liaisons between Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security, who work with our headquarters contacts, who work with our LARCC liaisons, who also work with our military installation points of contact. So these are the folks at the military installation who have been designated to work with our ACOs. So we also have our ACO points of contact. Just as every ACO has 2 designees on domestic violence shelters and those sensitive and confidential operations, we also have 2 designees per every ACO who are our military point of contact. They know that they have their separate operations, they have separate meetings, they have a separate ops log, everything. They're tracking these operations between the 2 of them to coordinate all efforts with the installations in their ACO's jurisdiction. While all of these are going on operationally, we also work with partnership and recruiting. We have partnership specialists on our weekly military call, recruiting, because we do recruit from military installations, which is a huge component of our recruiting efforts. And all 5 of these are constantly at play during and through to the end of our military operations. So with that being said for military, we will now jump into our notes on tribal territory.
I will just add something about that is not every ACO has every operation that we've discussed, but despite that, we still have designees that are participating in those calls, like the military calls, even though we don't have any bases, so that everybody kind of knows everything that's going on. Okay, hang on one second. Tribal territories. Among the many operations conducted by the Census, UL, and NARFU are the best operations to capture tribal territory in the U.S. However, in order to complete a case on tribal land, only employees who live within the boundaries of the reservation can complete the case enumeration on that reservation. So I know, Salem has a bunch, Salem's ACO, in Oregon has some tribal lands, and they've been recruiting actively at those tribal lands to get somebody sworn in that lives there. In cases where no employees are available, the case will be escalated.
Yeah, so the main point here is we do utilize our tribal employees to be able to grant us access into these tribal reservations. So we will coordinate in some way, shape, or form someone with access to tribal reservations to be able to count these unique living situations effectively and respectfully. So we'll go ahead and go on to our last page, but we do want to address just quickly one of the big things that's changed or looks a little different due to COVID is higher education institutions. Our higher ed GQs are definitely a huge component of our group quarters. However, due to COVID, a lot of them have sent their students to study from home. So they're still in operation. They're still staffed. The colleges and universities are still staffed. However, their students are studying online from home and no longer on campus. A lot of our colleges and universities purposely chose the drop-off pickup method in order to avoid being put in a position where they would need to submit all of their student data on behalf of the university to decennial census operations. However, now that the students are studying from home, they're not there to receive the ICQ, fill it out for their point of contact at the higher ed level to collect all those ICQs and have a census enumerator come pick those up. So we have been coordinating with additional effort and resources, working specifically with our higher ed institutions on a case-by-case scenario, We did come to an agreement with the entire UC system on the minimum amount of data that they are able to submit. There's a whole approval process behind all of this. But due to somewhat of a gridlock there between the UC system being willing to work with Census, their general counsel suggesting it is against FERPA to submit all of this data on behalf of all their students. Even though the Department of Education did give a statement clarifying this to higher ed institutions, really though, we want to be able to work with colleges and universities. We need to get this data on behalf of the students in order to be able to count everybody, right? So we have compromised on some of the data for the UC system in particular in order to still get this count. And we had to, because otherwise they would not have wanted to work with us. So it is for any folks working with colleges and universities, it is a little bit more tricky. These very well-organized, massive group quarters, there's a lot of red tape and folks to go through in order to get what we as Census actually want, which is just that student data. We just want to complete their enumeration in order to get that complete count. So we wanted to touch on higher ed, but Michael, is there something there too that you'd like to touch on? I'm sure there's plenty there to talk about. Michael, you may be on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. We obviously in Oregon, we're not in the UC system, so we don't have any particular arrangements made. So we're still going to be figuring out how we're going to deal with our universities.
Yeah, good point. It is a very fluid situation where, yeah, for your universities, as you come against colleges and universities pushing back on cooperating with enumeration, we just have to go case-by-case scenario, jump through the hoops of the approval process to make sure we can get, come to some sort of solution with every single GQ.
And at this point, unless the GQ, including a college, calls us, we're not reaching out at this point in time because of the timelines that we don't have set up yet. So, I know this is all going to be kind of in the near future how we're going to cope with that.
Yeah, totally. With our pause in operations, and then when we get back into the swing of things. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, well, unless any further questions come in, this does conclude our presentation. Our names are on the screen for any contact or outreach or any follow-up that anybody has, and the email address listed there. Okay, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your training.
Thank you. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you for viewing today's training. The recording will now end.